In the early morning darkness of June the 19th, 1944, aboard the Japanese aircraft carrier Shokaku, serving as the flagship for Carrier Division 3 somewhere in the Philippine Sea, a young officer named Lieutenant Commander Yoshiaki Irikin found himself writing words in his personal journal that would have cost him his life had anyone in command discovered them. His hands shook as he adjusted the flight goggles resting on his forehead, struggling to articulate what he had witnessed in recent days. The Americans had developed something beyond mere numerical superiority in vessels or aircraft, he scrawled quietly. They had created an entirely new form of warfare itself, and the realization chilled him to his core. Every sortie now felt like flying deliberately towards certain death. As the darkness before dawn hung heavy over the fleet, Irikin had been observing phenomena that contradicted everything his 3 years of unbroken victories since Pearl Harbor had taught him to believe. American radar installations were painting signatures across multiple display screens, tracking incoming Japanese aircraft at ranges their own sophisticated equipment could never hope to achieve. Across the water, every single American warship blazed with electric lighting, utterly confident in their defensive capabilities and indifferent to revealing their positions. Intercepted radio communications, translated only partially by their overworked intelligence officers, demonstrated a level of coordinated fighter direction that rendered their own systems archaic by comparison. Throughout the ready rooms, scattered across 9 different Japanese carriers that particular morning, 430 of the Emperor's most dedicated naval aviators made their final preparations for what their commanders had assured them would prove the decisive engagement that would permanently halt the American offensive drive toward the Japanese home islands. Among their number sat hardened veterans who had participated in the attack on Pearl Harbor, conducted the devastating raids across the Indian Ocean, and survived the brutal fighting at the Coral Sea, now sitting shoulder to shoulder with inadequately trained replacement pilots who had never once fired their weapons at an enemy aircraft in actual combat conditions. What absolutely none of them understood as they conducted their pre-flight rituals was that within the next 14 hours they would participate in the complete and utter destruction of Japanese naval aviation as an effective fighting force, losing 346 carrier-based aircraft in a massacre so thoroughly one-sided that American pilots would mockingly refer to the engagement as nothing more than a turkey shoot. The mathematical equations of their impending annihilation were already being calculated aboard American vessels, not in terms of traditional kill ratios or tactical maneuvering capabilities, but rather in fundamental technological and training disparities that no conceivable amount of fighting spirit or personal courage could possibly overcome. American radar installations could reliably track incoming targets at 150 miles distance compared to Japanese equipment that barely functioned at 50 miles under optimal conditions. American pilots arrived at their carrier squadrons with 600 hours of comprehensive flight training behind them, while Japanese aviators were being rushed through abbreviated programs with less than 100 hours total. The Grumman F6F Hellcat fighter featured 2,000 horsepower engines, comprehensive armor plating protecting the pilot, and revolutionary self-sealing fuel tanks that prevented catastrophic fires, while the Mitsubishi Zero still flew with essentially the same fragile airframe design that had been cutting-edge in 1940 but was now hopelessly obsolete. The catastrophic collapse had actually begun many months earlier, though precious few individuals in positions of authority recognized it at the time. Following the absolutely devastating losses sustained at Midway, throughout the prolonged Solomons campaign, and during the brutal attrition around Rabaul, the Japanese Navy had hemorrhaged its most experienced and irreplaceable pilots at a rate far exceeding their capacity to train adequate replacements. Saburo Sakai, recognized as Japan's leading surviving ace pilot, had been forcibly pulled from active combat duty after sustaining severe wounds in August of 1942. Hiroyoshi Nishizawa, famously known as the Devil of Rabaul for his extraordinary skills, had been killed while serving as a mere passenger during a transport flight in October of 1943. The overwhelming majority of pilots who had executed the brilliant surprise attack on Pearl Harbor were now dead, lost in the grinding attrition of 3 years of unrelenting combat. Among those preparing for launch that fateful morning was Ensign Takeo Yamamoto, a mere 19 years old, possessing only 82 hours of total flight time in his logbook. His personal diary, painstakingly recovered after the war concluded from surviving family members, provides modern historians with one of the extraordinarily few detailed first-hand accounts of the psychological condition of Japanese pilots confronting overwhelming American technological superiority. They continuously tell us that fighting spirit will overcome any material disadvantage, the young ensign had written just 3 days before the battle commenced. But I have personally examined the American aircraft in our reconnaissance photographs. Their planes are significantly bigger, obviously newer, vastly more numerous than anything we possess. How exactly does fighting spirit overcome radar equipment that can see perfectly in complete darkness? The journey toward this moment of devastating reckoning had begun with increasingly troubling intelligence reports that Japanese naval commanders had made the catastrophic decision to dismiss or downplay. During April of 1944, Japanese reconnaissance flights conducted over American anchorage positions in the recently captured Marshall Islands had photographed new classes of carriers that seemed to defy all rational comprehension. The Essex-class carriers, displacing 27,100 tons when fully loaded for combat operations, each individually carried between 90 and 100 aircraft. Japanese intelligence officers had counted 15 of these enormous vessels already operational in the Pacific Theater, with additional units appearing on a monthly basis. Lieutenant Masahiko Okumiya, serving as air operations officer aboard the carrier Hio, had studied these reconnaissance photographs with obsessive intensity. During extensive post-war interrogation sessions, he revealed the profound limitations of their understanding of American capabilities. "We absolutely knew they possessed more carriers than our fleet," he explained. "But we fundamentally didn't understand what that numerical superiority actually meant in practical operational terms. Each individual American carrier possessed repair facilities and machine shops that we couldn't even dream of replicating. They could successfully repair damaged aircraft that we would simply push overboard as total losses. A single American carrier had more comprehensive maintenance capability than our entire combined fleet could muster." Commander Minoru Genda, the brilliant architect of the Pearl Harbor attack plan and now serving on Admiral Toyota's headquarters staff, had been reading captured American pilot interrogation reports with steadily growing alarm and dread. American pilots received 350 hours of rigorous primary training, followed by 200 hours of advanced specialized training, and then another 100 hours of intensive practice with their actual operational squadrons before seeing combat. If these reported numbers are genuinely accurate, he had written in a classified memorandum, then every single American pilot entering combat possesses approximately 5 times the total training hours of our current aircrew replacements. We are effectively sending poorly trained children to fight against seasoned professionals. The morning of June the 19th dawned absolutely clear and brilliantly bright, creating perfect flying weather conditions that would offer no natural concealment opportunities for either opposing force. At 0430 hours, Admiral Jisaburo Ozawa, commanding the Japanese mobile fleet from the brand new carrier Taiho, ordered his search planes launched to locate the American task force. At 0500 hours, Warrant Officer Sakai Manda, piloting a reconnaissance bomber on an extended search pattern, transmitted the first confirmed sighting report of American carrier positions. Task Force 58, operating under the tactical command of Admiral Mark Mitcher, comprised 15 fleet carriers, 7 powerful battleships, 21 cruisers of various classes, and 69 destroyers, representing an overwhelming concentration of naval power. At 0730 hours, Admiral Ozawa ordered the immediate launch of his first strike wave consisting of 69 aircraft. As these planes laboriously formed up into their attack formations, American radar operators aboard the battleship USS Alabama were already tracking their approach from 150 miles away with perfect clarity. Admiral Mitch's response proved immediate and overwhelming. He ordered every available fighter aircraft launched to establish multiple defensive layers. The F6F Hellcat had been specifically and deliberately designed by Grumman engineers with the singular purpose of defeating the Zero fighter in combat. Its massive Pratt & Whitney engine generated a full 2,000 horsepower compared to the Zero's relatively modest 1,130 horsepower. The Hellcat carried comprehensive armour protection for the pilot that the Zero completely lacked. The Hellcat's 650 caliber machine guns, firing armour-piercing incendiary ammunition, could literally destroy a Zero with just a few well-placed hits, while the Zero's lighter armament required extended firing runs to achieve similar damage. Lieutenant Alex Vrasiu, flying his Hellcat from the carrier USS Lexington, would personally achieve 6 confirmed victories during this single engagement alone. They flew in completely predictable patterns, maintaining tight formations that made them exceptionally easy targets for our attacks, he later reported. When we dove on them from superior altitude, they attempted to turn and dogfight, but at the high speeds we maintained their control surfaces locked up and became unresponsive. We simply stayed fast, maintained our altitude advantage, and methodically picked them off one after another. The first Japanese strike wave lost 41 aircraft out of the 69 originally launched. Only one single American Hellcat was shot down in the entire engagement. At 0830 hours, Admiral Ozawa ordered the launch of his second massive strike wave consisting of 128 aircraft, representing the largest single coordinated carrier strike operation of the entire war. The American Combat Air Patrol had been carefully stacked in multiple defensive layers ranging from 17,000 to 24,000 feet altitude, with each layer controlled by specialized fighter director officers using radar displays to coordinate the movements of hundreds of individual aircraft simultaneously in three-dimensional space. Yeoman Second Class Ito Takeshi, serving as radio operator aboard a dive bomber, somehow survived the massacre to later describe the experience. The entire sky became nothing more than a shooting gallery with us as the targets, he recalled. American fighters appeared from every conceivable direction, always possessing the critical altitude advantage. The Americans flew through our carefully organized formation like hungry sharks tearing through helpless schools of fish. By noon, the second strike wave had lost 97 of its 128 aircraft. American losses totaled exactly 4 Hellcats. The third wave of 47 aircraft launched at 1000 hours. Their formation leader, Lieutenant Commander Takeo Miyano, had been promoted to his position just days earlier after his predecessor was killed. His final radio transmission before being shot down was heartbreaking in its simplicity. Enemy fighters are everywhere around us. We cannot possibly reach the target. Meanwhile, American submarines had penetrated the Japanese defensive screen and were stalking the carriers themselves. At 1400 hours, USS Albacore fired a spread of 6 torpedoes at the carrier Taiho. 5 missed their target, but the 6th struck home on the starboard side, rupturing aviation fuel tanks. Poor damage control procedures and inadequate training allowed volatile fuel vapors to spread unchecked throughout the massive vessel. At 1432 hours, Taiho suffered a catastrophic explosion and sank rapidly, taking 1,650 men down with her, including Admiral Ozawa's entire staff, who barely escaped. At 1420 hours, the veteran carrier Shokaku, survivor of numerous battles, took 3 torpedo hits from the submarine USS Kavala. Without experienced damage control teams to contain the fires, flames spread completely unchecked through the ship. At 15:01 hours, Shokaku exploded violently and sank beneath the waves. The fourth wave of 48 aircraft launched at 1100 hours, but by this point all tactical coordination had completely collapsed. 49 aircraft diverted toward Guam, attempting to refuel at land bases, only to fly directly into 27 waiting Hellcats that had been positioned specifically to intercept them. As evening approached, Admiral Ozawa confronted absolutely staggering losses to his command. Of the 430 aircraft launched throughout the day, Only 130 remained operational. On June the 20th, Admiral Mitchell launched a desperately risky late-afternoon strike of 216 aircraft at extreme operational range against the retreating Japanese fleet. The American strike succeeded in sinking the carrier Hiyo and damaging several other vessels. When the attacking aircraft returned in complete darkness, Mitchell made the bold decision to order all ships fully illuminated despite submarine threats to guide his pilots home safely. 100 aircraft were lost to fuel exhaustion and crash landings, but only 76 aircrew actually died, as most were successfully rescued by destroyers and cruisers. The final statistics told the story of complete annihilation. Japanese losses included 3 fleet carriers sunk, approximately 600 aircraft destroyed, including land-based planes, and nearly 3,000 personnel killed. American losses totaled 130 aircraft and 76 aircrew members. Post-war technical analysis revealed the overwhelming scope of American technological advantages. The proximity fuse used in anti-aircraft shells increased kill probability by 700% compared to contact fuses. The F6F Hellcat would ultimately achieve a 19-to-1 kill ratio against Japanese aircraft throughout the war. American radar could track targets at 150 miles, while Japanese radar barely functioned at 50 miles under ideal conditions. During 1944 alone, American factories produced 96,000 aircraft of all types. Japan managed to produce 28,000. American aircraft factories operated continuously on 3 shifts around the clock. Japanese production facilities operated sporadically due to raw material shortages and bombing raids. The pilot training disparity had become utterly insurmountable. American naval aviators received 600 hours of comprehensive training before joining operational squadrons. Japanese pilots were being rushed through abbreviated programs averaging under 100 hours total flight time. American carriers employed steam catapults for aircraft launch. Japanese carriers still relied entirely on wind over the deck. American ships featured air conditioning throughout and even ice cream machines for crew morale. Japanese crews subsisted primarily on rice with occasional fish. The radar capability gap proved absolutely decisive in modern carrier warfare. American SK radar installations detected incoming aircraft at 150 miles range with precise altitude and bearing information. American fighter aircraft had 4-channel radio systems with crystal-clear reception. Japanese radios barely functioned and frequently failed completely. Admiral Ozawa submitted his brutally honest report to Naval Headquarters. The first mobile fleet has ceased to exist as an offensive force capable of conducting operations. Admiral Toyoda, Commander-in-Chief of the Combined Fleet, conducted his own assessment and concluded the Empire now faced only 2 possible futures: negotiated surrender or complete annihilation. Vice Admiral Takajiro Onishi, who would later organize the kamikaze program, argued that conventional warfare had become impossible. Japan simply lacked the industrial capacity, technological sophistication, and raw material resources to compete with American production on anything approaching equal terms. Secretary of the Navy James Forrestal acknowledged in a public statement that every American worker in every factory shared equally in this tremendous victory. Detroit automobile plants and Pittsburgh steel mills won this battle just as surely as the pilots who flew the missions. General Curtis LeMay, preparing for the strategic bombing campaign against Japan, acknowledged that the Navy's decisive victory had given the Army Air Force its crucial opportunity. The Marianas Islands would provide bases for B-29 operations against the Japanese home islands. Without eliminating Japanese naval aviation as an effective force, American forces couldn't have taken and held these strategically vital bases. Production statistics demonstrated Japan's absolutely hopeless strategic position. While Japan struggled to repair damaged carriers over many months, America was completing 7 brand new carriers every single month. Lieutenant Kaneyoshi Muto, tasked with training replacement pilots, described the impossible situation. We're attempting to train pilots in 6 weeks instead of the pre-war standard of 2 full years. Sending them into combat against Hellcats flown by 600-hour pilots is nothing less than murder. President Roosevelt emphasized in a radio address how American ingenuity, industrial might, and personal courage had united into an invincible combination. Every single rivet and part installed by factory workers contributed directly to this victory. Admiral Nimitz analyzed the strategic situation and concluded that while the Japanese fleet technically remained afloat, it had been rendered completely impotent as an offensive threat. American forces could now choose when and where to strike without facing any meaningful resistance from carrier aviation. Lieutenant Commander Takashi Hirose wrote a private letter that summarized the impossible situation facing Japan. Courage without technological capability is worthless. Fighting spirit without logistical support is suicide. The Americans possessed both capability and courage in overwhelming abundance. In modern industrialized warfare, courage alone is woefully insufficient. By sunset on June 20th, 1944, Japanese carrier aviation had ceased to exist as an effective fighting force. The air groups had been annihilated in history's most completely one-sided carrier battle. Admiral Ozawa's final operational report read like an epitaph for Japanese naval power. The first mobile fleet has been rendered impotent. We have carriers without aircraft to fly from them. We have aircraft without qualified pilots to fly them. We have pilots without adequate training to survive combat. American material superiority is absolute and overwhelming. Carrier warfare has effectively ended for Japan. Commander David McCampbell, who would become the Navy's leading ace, reflected on the battle's significance. After the Philippine Sea engagement, we never again faced serious organized opposition from Japanese carrier aviation. The real victory wasn't simply destroying their planes, but completely destroying their ability to train replacement pilots and rebuild their air groups. By the war's end, America had produced 141 carriers of all types. Japan completed only 7. American factories had built 324,000 aircraft. Japan managed only 76,000 despite desperate efforts. Captain Mitsuo Fuchida, who had led the Pearl Harbor attack and survived the war, wrote perhaps the most penetrating analysis of what had occurred. We attacked Pearl Harbor with 350 aircraft, considering ourselves invincible and unstoppable. The Americans lost more aircraft than that in just 2 days at the Philippine Sea battle without even pausing their operations. We awakened an industrial machine capable of producing victories as routinely as automobile assembly lines produce cars. The Battle of the Philippine Sea demonstrated conclusively that industrial warfare had permanently defeated traditional military prowess and fighting spirit. Japanese pilots engaging in the battle were no less brave or dedicated than the Pearl Harbor veterans, but personal courage meant absolutely nothing when confronted by radar-guided Hellcats flown by superbly trained pilots supported by overwhelming logistics. Lieutenant Commander Irikin's final diary entry, recovered after the carrier Shokaku sank, captured the fundamental truth with brutal clarity. We have been comprehensively defeated by American factories and industrial capacity. Every aircraft we destroy is immediately replaced by 2 better ones. Every pilot we kill is replaced by 3 pilots with superior training. We attempted to fight American industry itself, and we have lost decisively. The Americans have transformed warfare into mass production. We remained skilled artisans attempting to compete in the assembly line age. The sun had set permanently on Japanese naval aviation in the waters of the Philippine Sea, never to rise again. The Hellcats that destroyed nearly 400 aircraft in 2 days had accomplished far more than winning a single tactical battle. They had demonstrated beyond any doubt that industrial democracy could produce military victory just as surely and inevitably as assembly lines produced automobiles. The turkey shoot was over. The age of industrial warfare had begun, and Japan had been left behind.